in many respects, it wasn't a big surprise. This is not the first time we've had this, and we had this with the Brexit vote. We've had this with the surprise victories by some other right-wing groups, far-right parties, and at the extreme end, we've seen the coup in Turkey, or rather the attempted coup followed by a prime ministerial coup in Turkey. We've seen elections in Poland, in Hungary. So in a way, there's a theme developing here.
Now, Trump not only won, but Republicans carry Congress and they carry the Senate. What is he liable to do in the next few weeks and months? What are we going to see from Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, he has to be president first. So
Yes,
we've got until January.
Yes,
so you've got plenty of time to get the bunker dug and what have you. But this is it, really. This is the question. There's been a lot of Republican bigwigs talking about how they're going to spend the next few months clearing the Obama legacy, getting rid of the various things that Obama introduced. Obviously, the big worry here from many people on the left is Obama's big legacy project, which was his affordable health care, the Affordable Health Care Act. I did see that was the line being taken by some of the recent elected congressmen. This is what they were going to do. But let's face it, Trump isn't really, he's an outsider. He's not really part of this traditional conservative group. So we don't actually know how he's going to get on with them. So we'll have to see.
He was, conciliatory when he made his acceptance speech when it was apparent that he was going to win, which is fairly normal. But during his campaign, he talked about building the wall. He talked about kicking out illegal immigrants. He talked about, screening Muslims. He was very, very, confrontational with minorities, with women. Is there not going to be a certain expectation from his supporters that he carries out some of those threats?
Well, this is it, and it comes back to what we had been talking about earlier, the coalition behind him. There's not a single group. And there is a rather worrying, often referred to as the alt-right. These are far-right people active on the internet, social media, various internet publications. They tend to be white nationalists. Some of them are white supremacists. They're deeply conservative, but not in the Republican sense of conservative. They're deeply opposed to the way that the United States has moved in the last few decades. They were deeply opposed to multiculturalism, women's rights, gay rights, and so forth. And this group has been talking recently about the fact that they consider that they won the election and that they are the new establishment. And from their point of view, this is their time. The old liberal order, one of them said, is now dead. So in that sense, we can see that there's a possibility here of a clash with the older, maybe more Christian-inspired conservatives in the Republican Party. So we'll see.
What about where Canadians sit vis-a-vis the United States? I know, Trump did a lot of talking about NAFTA. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem. You couldn't have any two leaders any different than Trudeau and Trump. What about that? What's likely to happen to U.S.-Canada relations?
Yes, we'll have to see. It all depends who's in the cabinet and also what kind of role Trump decides to take. I suspect it'll very much depend on the kind of people who are brought in, who will then be, of course, obviously talking to their Canadian opposite numbers. I'd be a little bit more worried about issues like the question of NATO, the question of the status of free trade deals. These might be something that certain groups in his coalition might want to take a pickaxe to. So we'll see.
You hear a lot of people talking about the 1930s and Mussolini's rise to power and Hitler's rise to power. As we kind of wrap this up, do you see any Any parallels?
Well, some of the ideas are the same. There isn't the large groups of disgruntled veterans that you had in the 1930s. Many of these far-right groups are reconciled with democracy, as we talked about before. I would say, even though there are some links to the 1930s, it's not the 1930s I'd look to, but the 1980s. In the 1980s, the post-Cold War, not post-Cold War, the post-war, post-1945 compromise broke down. The kind of high wages, high inflation, low profits system that had kind of given our parents and our grandparents the cozy existence in the West that we were used to and we grew up in. And in the 1980s, that rapidly changed with the coming to power of people we now call neoliberals, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan being the clearest examples. And they went for sort of low wage, low inflation, high profit system. And, you know, they were replacing a system that was seen to no longer be functioning. And in some respects, I think we're now living at the end of that compromise, of that 1980s world. So what we're seeing now is a disintegration of the order. And there are various groups now competing to be the ones to rewrite the social compact. And the election of Donald Trump has brought a number of groups to the fore and pushed a number of groups back and away from power. So we'll just see how that plays out.
A lot of fear in the world this morning or today. Is it justified?
I don't know. Problem is, I don't know how competent Trump is. It may not be Trump we should fear, but what comes after him. If there's someone more competent than Trump. I don't know quite what he expects to get out of the presidency. We'll have to see about that. Perhaps far more frightening will be some of the people around him. Some of them will be regular American conservatives that we're fairly used to, but others of them could be linked to more maybe sort of illiberal ideas and much, much closer to what we've seen going on in Poland, in Hungary, and even, you know, let's face it, places like Turkey. And we've got the French elections coming up, presidential elections. Someone joked on Twitter that we're only a year away from a female president. Unfortunately, that female president is going to be Marine Le Pen. So we've got that to look forward to. We've got the Dutch elections coming up, and we've still got the ongoing Brexit question in Europe and the UK. So it isn't just the US, although, of course, the US is one of the biggest players.
Interesting time to be a political scientist.
It is. It's quite sad, but we tend to have higher student enrollments when times are bad and lower ones when times are good. So I often feel guilty about that.
Dr. Ashworth, thanks so much.
Great. Yes, thank you very much.